So now Dan. So Dan Bloomer is an independent consultant and manages LandWISE on behalf of its members. And Olivia Webster is a project manager for the sustainable systems at LandWISE. So they will be talking on the carbon positive making sense of soil carbon changes.
Perfect. So Dan and I are currently running the Carbon Positive Trail on the LandWISE micro farm in partnership with the Hawke's Bay Future Farming Trust. It's an MPI SFFF funded project that is particularly focused on processed vegetable crops, as it's co-funded by Heinz Waddies and McCain's. So Carbon Positive is a 6-year trial where we're trying to determine if we can improve the soil health by adopting methods that sequester carbon through sustainable and regenerative practices while maintaining or increasing crop quality or profitability. So we have 3 treatments within the trial. The conventional treatment is what the typical grower does on the Heretaunga Plains, whereas the regen treatment follows the McCain's regen framework. And the hybrid is somewhere in the middle and is thought of as a transitional phase. The McCain's framework is broken down into 6 principles: ensuring farm resilience, which is key for good business, ensuring enhancing crop and ecosystem biodiversity, armouring the soil with living plants, minimising soil damage, reducing agrochemical and impacts, and optimising water use. So this means that we can use the least impactful agrochemicals instead of using no agrochemicals at all, and integrating organic and livestock elements. So Dan and I don't make any decisions within the trial. We have an operations advisory group that make all the decisions. So the operations advisory group is made up of the processors, the agronomists, local growers, regen advisors and consultants. When making decisions, the operation advisory group has to think about, is it scalable? Can we do it at 0.1 of a hectare, and could a grower do it at 100 hectares? We also need to think about, is it practical to do? Is it profitable? Is it defensible? Is there evidence to back up the decisions that we're making? We've also been hosting monthly field walks to update everyone what we're doing within the Carbon Positive Trial, and this is a good opportunity for us to get questions to take back to our operations advisory group. And we've also been doing posts on LinkedIn to engage with a wider community, and that has also provided us with some questions to take back to the operations advisory group to ask them why we're making certain decisions within the trial. So the Soil Health Institute identifies 3 key soil health indicators: soil organic carbon concentration, carbon mineralisation potential, and aggregate stability. So to align with this, we've measured the soil organic carbon at the beginning of the trial down to 90 centimetres, and we've done it again 3 years later, and we'll do it at the end of the trial as well. Throughout the trial, we might not see a significant change in this total carbon, as it takes a long time for it to build up. But we are also monitoring the short-term changes in carbon by monitoring labile carbon twice a year. We're also measuring aggregate stability twice a year, as it's correlated with water retention, soil infiltration, root penetration and erosion. In addition to this, we're also collecting a broad suite of data such as visual soil assessments, crop yield and quality, gross margins and nutrient status by doing fortnightly nitrate testing with our NitroCheck device. We've been using the SLAKES app to test aggregate stability, as it's a recommended method by the Soil Health Institute, as it's practical and cost effective. We wanted to see how this method compared to the LandCare's available test that they have. And so we partnered with Te Ahi Kawariki and ran a project with 8 groups of growers throughout New Zealand. And we wanted to determine how usable the app is for growers, as well as comparing the results. We found that there was a strong correlation between the SLAKES app results and the LandCare aggregate stability test results, indicating that the SLAKES app is a reliable method to use. The growers found the SLAKES app easy to use, and some said that they would add it to their routine paddock sampling to identify paddocks that need a break from intensive vegetable production. In parallel to this project, we ran the NitroCheck project. Soil nitrate testing is essential for effective nitrogen management in agriculture, enabling farmers to optimise fertiliser applications while minimising environmental impact. The NitroCheck device produces a nitrate concentration based on the colour of a nitrate test strip, and we compared those results to the Hills Lab mineral nitrogen test. We found that there was a good correlation between the results, proving that the NitroCheck is a reliable, cost-effective way to determine the soil nitrate in field when it's calibrated and calculated correctly. So we're now halfway through our 4th growing season where we have grown butternuts. One of the biggest lessons that we've learnt so far has been the value of our winter cover crops. So we're not just growing 6 crops, we're effectively growing 11 crops. Winter cover crops play a crucial role in keeping living roots in the soil, continuously pumping photosynthetes below the soil, contributing to our soil carbon buildup. Just as importantly, we've learnt how careful planning is essential when selecting the right cover crop before the cash crop, and also deciding how and when to terminate the cover crop. We also did some work with Te Ahi Kawariki and worked with Charles Murfield, Andrew Luxmore, Karen Coleman and Chris Lambert to interview growers about their experiences with cover crops. We wanted to understand their motivation for growing the cover crops, the barriers to implementing them, and the challenges of growing them. We found that the main motivations for growers was to improve their soil structure. The top 3 barriers were establishment reliability, ease of termination, and biological risk factors such as pest and disease carryover from the cover crop to the cash crop. And the challenges that they were facing were not having enough time between their crops, difficulty terminating their cover crops, and difficulty establishing the cover crops. These are all things that we've experienced throughout the carbon positive trial when we've been trying to grow our cover crops. So before butternuts, all 3 treatments were in pasture-based cover crops that were all grazed by sheep. The regen and hybrid treatments were sprayed to keep about 70% of the ground covered with living roots until 1 week before they were planted in butternuts. Then they were both strip-tilled, compared to the conventional treatment, which was broadcast sprayed 4 weeks before planting, then disked, aerated and hoed. Not disturbing the soil outside of the strip-tilled area didn't only reduce the disturbance of the soil, but it also suppressed the weeds, as we had a weed strike in the conventional treatment after planting, so we had to spray before the butternuts germinated. In the carbon positive trial, we've also explored the opportunity of reducing nitrogen inputs in the regenerative treatment without compromising crop performance, as nitrogen fertilizers often overused within cropping systems, and the use and manufacturing of nitrogen fertilizers is actually the biggest carbon emitter on the micro farm. Last year, the regenerative treatment beans received 29 kilos of nitrogen per hectare compared to the conventional treatment which got 61 kilos. Although the regenerative treatment received less fertilizer, it produced a significantly higher yield than the conventional treatment. We think that the conventional treatment had a luxury uptake of nitrogen which did not equate to yield. So this year for the butternuts, we again wanted to see if we can reduce the nitrogen inputs without impacting the yield. The regen treatment has received half the standard fertilizer rate at planting and no granular fertilizer at side dressing. Following recommendations, Biostar N and Microcin were applied at planting via liquid injection. This is to help with nitrogen availability and for healthy root growth. So throughout the butternut crop, the regenerative treatment has only received 18 kilos of nitrogen compared to the conventional, which has had 77, and the hybrid, which has had 67. So leaf testing showed that all treatments were higher than the recommended level for nitrogen based on the Hills medium range that they provide, although the conventional treatment was significantly higher than the regen treatment. After side dressing, the soil nitrate levels were significantly higher in the conventional treatment. However, the regenerative treatment had 65 kilos of nitrate nitrogen per hectare, which should be sufficient at meeting the crop demand, and we won't know how our yield has been impacted by this until we do our harvest, as it's quite hard to tell when you're walking through the paddock, as butternuts grow in clusters and then there won't be any and then you'll see a cluster as well, so we won't know for sure yet if that's had an impact on our yield. So the environmental impact quotient is a tool available online through Cornell University, which is used to determine the field use environmental impact of specific agrochemicals. The field use EIQ is a score based on how toxic the product's active ingredient is and how much of the active ingredient has been used. So we use the field use EIQ to compare agrochemicals when we're looking at applying stuff to the regenerative and the hybrid treatment. So this year we haven't actually changed from the conventional spray program for butternuts, as most of the spray applications have been around 10, which is reasonably low compared to an application of glyphosate, which is 60, for example. And you can see that herbicides are actually our biggest input on the EIQ score. So I'll hand you over to Dan, who can talk to you about our results.
Thank you. Just to go back to regenerative cropping, we're not totally sure what it is, really. You know, we know what the 6 principles are, but our advisory groups struggled to work out how to apply that to processed crops here at Tonga Plains. And they started off with a bit of a blinker thing that they decided you may not use glyphosate. That meant that they wanted to do other things. That caused problems with cultivating cover crops and did a lot more cultivating than you might like to do. I think that makes some difference in results that we've got, but we can't tell you. But anyway, there are 6 bars there. The first 3 on the left are what we had for soil carbon before we started doing anything in this project, and they're arranged in the same stack as your soil profile, right? So the dark brown ones are the topsoil going down into our subsoil, and the number on it is tonnes per hectare. So to start off with, they look different there, but significantly if you do stats, they're not different. And that's just the variation that you get within any paddock when you start to measure stuff. Never exactly the same either. The 3 bars on the right are exactly the same measurement 3 years later, and you'll see that they don't look any different. Right? There's tiny bits of difference, but not really much going on. So that's how it is. There's a little bit of change about where in the profile it might be, but basically after 3 years we haven't seen it move. So that's the total. This one is the labile carbon. So labile carbon's the dates from roots decaying, not bound long term, really fast. The really active stuff that does a lot of work in the soil, and it's really important. But if we look at this, we see that maybe we've got a little bit less labile carbon after 3 years than we had to start with. So again, not really statistically different, but also you see the treatments aren't that different either. But Olivia mentioned we do test that more often than beginning and middle. So this is the same data looking at the labile carbon. There's a year and a bit between the first 2 readings, but then it's 6 monthly. And if you look at that, you'll see that our labile carbon treatments that we're doing so much as a reflection of crops we've been growing and crop cycles going through. So what we've got is we grew tomato crop for waddies back in here. Then we had a cover crop. After the cover crop, after the tomatoes, we had the most labile carbon. And then after peas and beans, we kind of burnt it off, and we've come back to less carbon. So that's the sort of trends we're seeing, that it's not so much the treatment differences, which really, apart from nitrogen, addition of a few biologicals, probably the biggest difference. The cultivations ended up being not that different between the treatments, really. So what I've been doing for the last little while is trying to understand what's going on with the carbon and how is it that we don't see changes, or do see changes, what's going up and down, why is it getting the data we've got. So to do that, I've been playing around with a little bit of a model that looks at all the pools. So you have so much photosynthesis, what happens to that, and how much goes into the leaves and roots, and how much gets watered, how much goes into roots, how much goes out of the roots and into the soil, how much gets burned out of the soil and just stuff. And that's been an interesting process. So to start off with, we have a MET station on site, so we know exactly how much radiation we got. And so we worked out this gross primary production, the maximum amount of photosynthesis that you can get. And then we look at the plants and how they move that around within the plant, how much goes where. And so the second stage is saying how much went into above ground biomass, root carbon, and what they call biodecomposition. So we haven't models. So people like Modus model, and there's lots of globally, there's lots of research stuff, and we've taken the modelling that they use, applied that to our situation, what's going on. And then the next bit is looking at the dynamics of how fast does the carbon in the soil disappear again. That's heavily driven by how much moisture, how much temperature you've got, and obviously bugs and to break things down too. And there's another thing about humification, by how much of that labile carbon becomes stable. And that's a process where, think of it as bacteria and viruses, sugars, they bind them up inside the soil particles. Once they're there for thousands of years. That's really locked it up. So your long-term carbon actually comes from sugary stuff that came out of the roots, that came out of the partitioning, that came out of the photosynthesis, came from this. So it's a long way of getting to the end, but people talk about the liquid carbon pathway. So we can bury residue. They tend to be very fast turnover and gone again. Glyn Francis, back in the days of crop and food research, some people will remember, studied what happens to the carbon if I incorporate the stubble from a cereal crop. And he measured the CO2 coming off the paddock, and he measured everything else. And he said, you know, if you cultivate that residue into the paddock in 3 days, lost it all as CO2. So it wasn't the stubble that disappeared that went into the soil, but all of this labile carbon that you've oxidized by cultivating, push, it's gone in a big rush. So his comment from that is don't incorporate, leave it on top. So that's one thing to think about. You can put a lot of tons of biomass on and not get a lot of benefit back. So now the rest of this is a model. It's not true, but it's a way of helping Dan try and understand what on earth is going on and make sense of why we've got what we've got. So that is the amount of canopy cover that Olivia and others have measured in our paddocks. So every week, one of the jobs we do is we go out and we use an app called Canopio, a phone app that you take a photo of the ground, calculates the green cover that our canopy. That takes an hour or so because there's 12 plots and readings per plot and lots of walking and running around the place. But we have that weekly, and then we interpolated to get it to daily data. Right? So interpolation just means we're going to assume that between these 2 points there was a straight line. That's the interpolation I use. I haven't done any bendy, creaky, simple interpolation. So that is 3 years of daily canopy cover. And then this is what happens if you multiply that by our radiation. So that's the gross primary production. That's how much photosynthesis on, how much carbon did we trap from the canopy cover times the amount of radiation we had that day, assuming we had no soil moisture stress, and actually we did have some soil moisture stress in the tomatoes, the regenerative tomatoes at one stage, and it pulled the numbers down. So that's the total amount of carbon we've got to play with, right? Because it's a solar farm. Your paddock is a solar farm. You can only use what you can capture and turn into something. That's the total that you've got to play with. Then we look at where it goes to, and this one here is looking at the partitioning in between the different bits. And so the green bit is what's in the bits above the ground, the brown bits is the roots, and the grey bits is what makes it all go dark, rhizodeposition. And so that's the conventional treatment at the top, and it's the hybrid treatment next, and then the regenerative treatment after that. And you won't be able to see much out of that because it's just a great big messy graph that's got pictures and likes and all over it. But what I would like you to look at this bit here compared to this bit here. So our group decided that rather than grow a crop of processed peas, they were going to carry on growing their cover crop longer and keep it going through and get the benefit to the soil of the cover crop. And having made that decision and not planted peas, they discovered the cover crop was actually starting to go to seed, and they were about to get a massive weed problem from radish seeds and oat seeds and stuff like that pouring into the ground. So they made a decision to terminate it by mulching. And then they decided that it needed to be sort of kept weed free, so they disked it. But what we had was 3 months of fallow, followed by about another month before we got back to significant ground cover. And that's all at one of the maximum photosynthesis times of the year. So that's a real big kick for our carbon numbers. So the next question I had was, well, how much have we actually lost? And so this won't make much sense either, but basically what it's saying is all those reddy brown bits, photosynthesis that we didn't get, that we could have got if we'd had an actively growing canopy soaking up the sun. And so if I want to grow my soil carbon, I've got to get that reddy brown bit as low as I possibly can, right? And the way I do that is by getting from bare soil to maximum canopy as fast as I can, and by not having fallow. That's really the critical message out of this. So the peas that we did, we kind of lost about 5.6 tonnes of carbon total, or net were about 2.5 tonnes, about half a tonne of carbon that we didn't pour into the soil and get in there, and of that about 250 kilos that didn't get locked up as permanent carbon. So that's a quick look at just one little period in the growth cycle where we lost potential sequester carbon, which is what we're all about. So the same as the bit on the top there, and you can see that we've got different amounts of lost carbon. It's because of the way we've chosen to grow things. But what I'm seeing so far is I don't think we've nailed how to apply regenerative principles well yet. And if we can get a focus away from not using herbicides to maximising the green cover in our paddock as much as possible, then I think we're going to see big changes. When we look at some of these conventional growing systems, people tend to be a bit rude about conventional practice. And we've got growers who are identified as being, oh my God, look at the diesel they burn and how they do stuff. And they do burn diesel, and they are very high input, but they're a hell of a high output too, and reliably high output. And so if you look at the inputs per unit output, they're pretty good. But the other thing they do is some of them, like there's an example we went to with a tomato grower, was grazing lambs yesterday afternoon, sprayed glyphosate in the evening, rotary hoed it and planted tomatoes that were growing as seedlings by tea time the next day. So you can't shorten up the fallow period much more than that, other than by planting the tomatoes first and then spraying it out. And we've got another farmer who's more like this hybrid thing, who grazes his lambs and he sprays out strips, the same as Olivia mentioned we did, carries on grazing the lambs on half to 2/3 of the paddock while the roots all break down and soil gets easy to cultivate, strip tills it, plants sweet corn, and then before the sweet corn comes up, then sprays out the paddock. So there's about a day between the seeds coming up and the glyphosate going on. So again, maximising the amount of photosynthesis going on. It's actually maximising production and dollars in his pocket. So those systems, while we tend to say regen is great, these systems are also pretty good if you do them right. The problem we have is on lots of the Hiratonga plains, and the same with what you've got around Pukekohe, is with really intensive systems, soil never gets a holiday. Whereas the guys doing the hybrid stuff, if we look at off the Hiratonga plains within Hawke's Bay, they'll often have a 5-year rotation. They might do an intensive vegetable crop, it might be carrots, but then they'll go from carrots into wheat crop, a winter wheat crop, winter wheat into ryegrass for a few years, It's actually over the 5 years, it's got 3, 4 years of restoration and then back into crop. Right? If you're not having those spells, it's a bit hard soil to recover. So one of the things that Olivia also mentioned was the stakes, looking at your soil aggregate stability. And it was interesting going around the different regions and talking to farmers about that, because one said, oh, we'd probably get an interesting result if we went to that paddock, but I'm not taking you there because it's stuffed. I thought, well, that's a pity, because that would have been a really interesting one to test. But it was a case of a paddock that couldn't handle bad conditions. So if everything was perfect, you'd probably get a crop, but get a bit of heavy rain and they'd lose a crop. And so they took it out of production for a year, tried, and it's still lost. And then they've put it out, but they don't know when to go back into it. So we think that Slake's test got promise as a monitoring tool to tell you when you're getting close to a point where you might be pushing the boundaries and at risk of adverse events. Earlier today we were talking about resilience. So that's that. So I'll just finish off with this last piece. Conventional, reliable, predictable production. Hybrid, we've maintained production while reducing some of our synthetic inputs and reducing our cultivation. Regenerative, we're not sure how we're going, but sometimes we've had lower yield. Sweet corn we had lower yield because we had less nitrogen. Beans we had higher yield, but was that because we hadn't actually abused the soil trying to grow peas. But what we have done is use less nitrogen, and it isn't an obvious driver of 70% less. It's a lot less nitrogen, but we're not losing the yield that I think from that. So we've learned a lot. The next 3 years is going to give us a chance to apply that learning, and what we need to be doing is focusing on photosynthesis, really growing that. So that's us, and we'll have our LandWISE conference in May, and we've done a lighter touch visit. Come and have a look at these things.